Shabbat Shalom. Well, as we dive back into the warm, welcoming waters of Torah this week, we find Parshat Tetzaveh. The name Tetzaveh comes from, as it so often does, the first words which instruct Moses that he shall command, Ata Tetzaveh, you shall command those children of Israel, concerning the kindling of the eternal light, the eternal flame that will be kept by the priests, not to go out. And the portion includes a whole host of intricate details surrounding the priestly garments, and those of the high priest in particular, the Kohen Gadol, as well as instructions for initiating Aaron and his sons to serve as the Israelite priests, helping them bring their offerings before the Eternal One. And if you'd like to know more about that, there's Torah study tomorrow morning, and we're going to go into that a little bit more there. Yet, I can't help this week but be drawn back to the broader narrative of our people at this moment in Torah. You see, if we follow the whole arc, just a few short months ago in the text, Moses led the children of Israel out of Egyptian slavery and into the wilderness, the unknown. They went the long way by God's design so that they might rendezvous at Sinai with the Holy One. A people who had been subjected to others' laws for some 400 years now needed a system by which to live and govern themselves. Developing such laws would not come quick or easily, and would require, as we read last week and this week, attention to intricate details for maintaining and sanctifying God's presence in their midst. The encounter with the divine terrifies, but it also starts to provide some direction. You see, in a moment of national emergency, the rule of law is what starts to provide our people, Israel, according to our holy text, according to Torah, with the ethical building blocks for the free society that we were to create as we wandered through the desert on our way to something better. Today, as you likely know, President Trump declared a national emergency here in our country, in our time. Last night, both houses of Congress finally passed legislation that would avert another government shutdown. Yet after receiving only some $1.3 billion instead of the $5.7 billion requested by the president for his border wall, the president declared a national emergency today to appropriate the funds without congressional approval. So tonight I find myself wondering, what is the nature of a national emergency? I'm inclined to believe the New York Times, you see, when it reports that President Trump's rationale is based on, and I quote, false or misleading claims about the current state of security on our southern border. Yet despite such divisive, inaccurate rhetoric, it will still be quite some time before we see whether or not such a national emergency will be upheld by the courts or appropriately challenged by Congress. And so still, this unprecedented action forces us to ask, what in fact constitutes a national emergency? For our Israelite ancestors, the national emergency they face in the desert is the urgent reality of sustaining their lives, of self-governance amongst the 600,000-something Israelites who journeyed out of Egypt and began their trek to that promised land. And for us, that national emergency included the need to create space for God's presence to dwell among us. And this Torah portion addresses the emergency with the details of the priestly garments. You might not think they're connected, but in fact, they are. You see, in particular, I'm thinking of the Choshen Mishpat, the breastpiece of decision, as it's often translated. It's something the high priest would wear. And it was to include 4 rows of 3 stones each set into this breastpiece. In fact, one of our Torah scrolls has one very similar to it, I believe. We can find it another time.
At the Aleinu.
At the Aleinu, maybe we'll find it. But the funny thing about those stones, and the thing that makes me connect them to this idea of national emergency, is that each stone of the 12 different stones was to be engraved with the name of one of the 12 tribes. And in wearing this breastpiece of decision, of justice, of the rule of law, the high priest was to be wearing a physical reminder that that priest, that leader, represented a diverse group of peoples coming together to create one society, bound to each other through sacred obligations. And in many ways, our United States of America really is no different. As a people, the challenges we are facing as a country might make it feel like we too are wandering in the desert, seeking a promised land, seeking something better, seeking an ideal form of governance, self-governance and self-determination that relies on both our freedom to elect our representatives, but also on our subsequent obligations to one another. And the challenges we face are real. There's no question that there are true emergencies in this country. It just so happens that the southern border, by most accounts, excluding the president's, is not really one of them. And no amount of deception of our people or circumvention of Congress will really change that. Ironically, and sadly, of course, this week does mark an anniversary of a moment that does highlight a true national emergency. A year ago yesterday, 17 people, 14 of them teenagers, were murdered in Parkland, Florida, at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. You see, the threat, the constant threat of gun violence would seem, at least to me, to constitute a true national emergency. It's just not the kind of national emergency that a president can declare and easily throw additional appropriations at or build a wall to fight. It's a threat that strikes rather close to home, too, sometimes. I'm sure most of you know that yesterday, just yesterday, not last year yesterday, but yesterday, there was an incident where a firearm was discharged pretty much just around the corner at Ohel Chana High School, right on Beverly, right by the Grove. And I'm relieved that there was no loss of life yesterday in that incident. And I want to caution us against hasty conclusions because a lot of the details are still unclear regarding this incident. But the truth is that we don't need to know the details of that particular incident to know that this country's problem with guns really probably does constitute a national emergency. It does constitute a very threat to our lives, the way that the desert's lack of food and lack of water threatened our ancestors' lives thousands of years ago. But our ancestors, in their time of national crisis, turned towards the rule of law. They opened themselves to a system of governance with boundaries for its leaders. Aaron and his sons become the priests, sure, but their very bodies are bounded by special garments, reminding them to act in the interest of each and every tribe. Moses was the greatest prophet ever, according to the Torah, believe me. But even he delegated judicial power at the advice of his father-in-law, Jethro. We too could do the same. We too could turn towards our laws and our Constitution to face the seemingly insurmountable challenges that we really do face in this country. the epidemic of gun violence, the threats of climate change, and increasingly devastating natural disasters. Our Constitution, our system of law was in fact designed to help us wander through these wildernesses together as one people, united. But we need leadership that accepts that basic premise. We need leadership that doesn't try to lie their way into preferred positions. And we need leadership that wears that metaphorical breastpiece of decision every day, incorporating that diversity of people and the diversity of our nation into the intricate and difficult decisions that governance requires. So tonight, my friends, I am praying that our country will find leaders who turn towards our Constitution to help us navigate through this desert we find ourselves in. I'm sad to say that I don't see that leader in the White House, but I pray that we find them in the houses of Congress, in both parties, in the governor's mansions, in the judiciary and the state legislatures. I pray that we find those leaders in the corporate world, on Wall Street, in the classrooms, in police offices, in nonprofit organizations. I pray that we find such leaders at our border, too, ready to turn towards truth and righteousness, towards the rule of law and away from fear, away from deception, away from the darkness of hatred and xenophobia. May the national emergency that our Israelite ancestors faced in the wilderness help model for us a way to tackle our national emergencies today. And may we find in our sacred laws and stories the eternal light and love of the divine presence in our midst. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.